Now, how did these civil engineers work? Who were they? How were they understood as people in the United States? They sought the status of professionals. This was a key important term that carried with it gentlemanly status. Traditionally, there were three professions in the Anglo-American tradition: the so-called liberal professions of law, the clergy, and medicine. In England, under the system of primogeniture, firstborn sons of landed gentry gained access or gained control of the land and the property. And so, in order to keep the property together and in the family's hands, the firstborn sons were always charged with continuing the family tradition and indeed serving as the heads of the families. Second-born sons then were often sent into the military to represent the family and the country as a whole. Third sons or more sons went to the professions. Professions being a site where one could gain high status as a gentleman, while and significant income that would enable them to maintain the high status throughout their lives. In the United States, the civil engineers were trying to seek the status of professionals in this sense. And they claimed for themselves what had been accepted for the other professions. They claimed that the possession of esoteric knowledge by virtue of both their book learning and their practical training. They were emerging as an relatively autonomous group in the sense that they were self-regulating. And they developed a personal commitment to public responsibility. Civil engineers worked for the whole. So, to the extent that things worked out for civil engineers, they became gentleman managers with a combination of both practical and managerial knowledge. Sometimes they were proprietary gentleman project managers, which is to say they were part of the, early on they were part of the project and maybe in some position of ownership in the project. Or they served as consultants to the state. But a key point here is that in all respects, a sense of public responsibility, a sense of commitment to the whole was built into their daily activities. As we move through the 19th century, civil engineers occupied two different kinds of positions, both of which positioned them in a way as what I like to think of as lone rangers. The civil engineer became the lone ranger who rode into town and saved the town from one problem or another. And they did this in two different ways. One is by receiving commissions. They were commissioned engineers. Now, you may understand this concept of commission from the military. A commissioned military officer signs on for a specific term, for a specific period of time, but can resign the commission, can walk away from the job, unlike draftees, for example. In the private sector, a private commission involved one's commitment to a project. One was basically a project engineer. So one would come from a different location, geographical location, ride in on the white horse, and stay for the length of the project. And this might go on for several years or a decade, depending on the kind of project we were talking about. But again, they were signed on only to work. Their work was tied, their position, their authority was tied directly to the project. And as commissioned engineers, they didn't have direct authority inside of the chain of command. They didn't have direct authority over anyone, but by virtue of being on the job on the daily basis and monitoring developments, they played a significant role in project development. So they basically had a significant effective authority on the job. The second role, which is much closer to the Lone Ranger image, is the consultant engineer. And many engineers would work either on commission jobs or as consultants or both. And as consultant engineers, they traveled around giving advice. A number of British engineers did early on in the history of the United States, did take advantage of the need for engineers by traveling around and serving as consultants. In both cases, you can see that the civil engineers maintained relatively autonomous status. They did not work inside of organizations, and this is going to be a key difference between civil engineers and mechanical engineers.